So in discussing altruism, I want to compare evolutionary psychology and the three main theories in sociology. So that would be structural functionalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionism. Because you can look at altruism through these lenses and you're going to see some very different emphases of why people are altruistic. And I think it'll also show some of the strengths and weaknesses of each of these theories as well. So the second three are core sociological theories. The first one is from evolutionary psychology. Certainly psychology has more than just that one, but the text will go into greater detail in some of that. I just want to make a juxtaposition here. So take a look at this chart. So evolutionary psychology, the main focus is a biological basis in altruism. Maybe we were evolved to be giving, caring kinds of people because maybe there's a survival benefit rather than always being selfish. Now, functionalism will look at how altruism maintains social order and cohesion, right? So functionalism is always about how does the social structure exist so that it functions properly, so that it survives, so that it stays together. Now, evolutionary psychology also is concerned with survival, but it tends to be more about survival at a genetic level, passing on your genes, right? We can talk about a whole herd or species surviving if we want to go, macro, but it's about this, natural selection and kind of passing on. Maybe people who were not altruistic died out more compared to people who were. As opposed to functionalism is how does the social structure survive? It's not so much about passing on your genetic material as it is about the society you're a part of continuing to maintain itself generation after generation. Now, conflict theory, though, is always looking for inequalities and how is one more powerful group oppressing or keeping down weaker groups. So in this case, how is altruism shaped by power and inequality? And then lastly, symbolic interactionism, which is more micro theory, very much concerned with the meanings people give to different symbols in their society. So how is altruism is constructed and enacted through daily interactions. An act that one person might see as altruism in one culture might not be considered or classified altruism in another culture. And so that would be the symbolic component, is understanding what do we even define as altruism? Because, if we ask these questions, why does altruism exist? Symbolic interactionism would say that's just a word applied to certain behaviors in one social context, and it may not exist in another, right? So looking at the views on these, right? So evolutionary psychology sees altruism as a survival strategy within the context of natural selection. Functionalism sees altruism as a social mechanism promoting stability and harmony. Conflict theory sees altruism as something to be analyzed within the context of social tensions, competition, and class struggle. And then symbolic interactionism sees altruism as socially constructed through interactions and shared meanings. So at the evolutionary level, we're looking at genetic relatedness. People tend to be more altruistic to those that they have a gene connection with. Reciprocal altruism, if that's a good strategy if you're going to receive altruism back, that would help you survive. Kin selection, right? We tend to be more altruistic to our families, to your children more than to your siblings more than to your cousins more than maybe to your neighbors more than just to citizens of your country. So you can think of these concentric circles where altruism is going to be more intense, this more center in ring of circle that they're in. Whereas in structural functionalism, they're looking at social solidarity. So is there a community among these people for some social or institutional reason, right? Do they have a kind of collective conscience? People at a ball game, unless they're really rabid fans of a team, or they're at a concert, they're not really this collective integrated group of people compared to, say, those who attend maybe we could say a small church or a family reunion, right, where people are all much more connected in some way. In conflict theory, the role of class struggle plays a part. Power relations, economic interests. Maybe people are more altruistic towards those who are higher in class standing, because there could potentially be more benefit to the person, right? And we see that, take, for example, aspects of prejudice. While there may be solidarity among people who experience prejudice of some kind, sometimes those communities carry prejudice themselves against other members of their community compared to those who don't have whatever stigmatizing label that has been put on them. So power groups, power dynamics can play a role in who we choose to be more altruistic or less altruistic to. And then at a symbolic level, acts of kindness within personal relationships, community involvement might be examples of altruism, because altruism is just a symbolic meaning, right? And so what's altruism in one relationship might be different to another, or in one community to another. But anything that in that relationship or in that community that is perceived as altruistic, then that's fine. It's altruistic. We don't have to, it's more of a subjective definition. And now lastly, let's talk about some of the strengths and limitations of these views. So if you're taking a genetic or a evolutionary psychology view, and you're focusing on altruism as some component of a natural selection strategy, one strength is that you really get an understanding of the biological basis that could contribute to altruism. But you could overlook a lot of the cultural and social influences that the other three theories very much take front and center. So, when you're only looking at the biology, at nature, there's a good chance you miss a lot that culture is also doing and operating on that variable, on that social phenomenon. So now let's look at structural functionalism. One strength is that, it does explain social functions, right? Why altruism could be good for the survival of a society, not just a species. But it might overlook conflicts and inequalities. Because functionalism is often trying to understand what makes a society function, it doesn't always do a good job of explaining the dysfunctions in a society, right? So we see stratification in work, for example, and functionalism will say, well, the economy might need different kinds of jobs, and people are trained with different skills, and they're placed in these different roles, and they get paid different amounts, but ultimately that helps the society function through a division of labor. But as we know, there's not equal opportunity to educational and economic and career opportunities out there, right? So there could be a lot of unfairness in that system, even if, quote unquote, the society functions as a result. So functionalism often is critiqued for overlooking conflict and inequality. Now, in conflict theory, definitely there's not overlooking conflict, right? So the strength is that it highlights power imbalances, right? That groups in power might not only might literally be the recipients of more altruism because they're valued more, their status is higher in a society. But because conflict theory is often looking for a perpetrator, right? What group is oppressing the other groups? Sometimes it doesn't always look at the positive aspects of social cohesion. Maybe this group gets along quite well, and while there are some inequalities and power imbalances, maybe overall there's a positive cohesion. I mean, every society has hierarchy to some degree, right? It's not a complete classless anarchic system that we see around the world thriving, right? So some degree of inequality, some degree of hierarchy might just be a necessary evil, but you're hard pressed to find a social system that doesn't have at least some degree of hierarchy and inequality in it. And so conflict theory will often only look at critiquing the inequities, and certainly at a high degree of stratification that becomes even more and more justifiable. And then lastly, the symbolic interactionist perspective, the strength is that it focuses on micro level interactions, right? So what counts as altruism in some situations may be highly subjective, and this theory understands that. But it may overlook broader social structures because symbolic interactionism is a micro theory. It's looking at the meanings shared by individuals. It's not always looking at the bigger structures in the society, whether those are social institutions that help the society function, that functionalism looks at, or power dynamics and inequities among hierarchies of highly stratified groups of people that conflict theory will look at. But both of those are more macro, whereas symbolic interactionism is much more micro. But anyway, I think laying these out side by side helps you understand that altruism is a pretty complex topic, but part of it is that depending on the theoretical lens you use to look at it, you might come up with different definitions of what altruism even is, what it's for, why it persists, and how you might try to promote more of it in a society, right? If you're trying to get more pro-social behavior.